A very warm welcome to all of you here im Haus der Wirtschaft in Berlin. A very warm welcome to the panelists today and to you, to all of you who are watching this event via live stream. Yeah, we just saw beautiful pictures of Norway. Unfortunately, today we only travel mentally, but I think it will be quite interesting. My name is Juliane Harakasen, and I'm here as your moderator today because I was quite impressed a few weeks ago when the Nordic ambassadors here in Berlin shared their experiences and like examples of what Nordic countries are doing if it comes to climate action. Today, we want to focus on the question, how important could Norway be for Germany and the difficult path to net zero emissions in 2045. That's only a little more than 20 years to go. But in this place, we also have to say that Norway still is an exporter of fossil fuels. So how does this go together? In a few minutes, we'll speak about this with the Prime Minister of Norway, who's here today. A very warm welcome. We are very happy to have you here. But please first welcome your host, the President of the Association of German Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Peter Adrian.
Good morning, Mr. Prime Minister, Excellency Ambassador Ölberg, State Secretary Greichen, ladies and gentlemen, all participants following our event online. As President of the Association of German Chambers of Commerce and Industry, DIHK, I cordially welcome you to the House of German Economy and to today's event. Together with the German-Norwegian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, our chamber abroad, we are pleased to be part of the visit to Berlin of the new Norwegian Prime Minister, Jonas Gahr Støre. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say thanks the Norwegian Embassy and you, Mr. Ambassador Ölberg, for the initiative. Many thanks also to the CEO of the Chamber abroad in Norway, Michael Kern, and his team. The Norwegian Chamber is an important member of our worldwide network of over 140 chambers and delegations in 92 countries. Together with the Chamber abroad and with 79 chambers in Germany, we at DIHK represent the economic interest of German companies in Berlin and Brussels. Ladies and gentlemen, besides the pandemic, energy issues and climate protection dominate the political agenda. On their way to climate neutrality, our companies face serious challenges. Can they get enough green energy? That is green electricity and green hydrogen. And what are the costs? Can they rely on a stable security of the supply? Can they master the transitional phase without being squeezed out of global markets? There is no easy answer to these questions. I'm sure Norway is going to be a stable partner for the German economy in the future, as it has always been. We can look back to decades of a stable supply of oil and gas. Without these energy resources from Norway, the German economy would not have succeeded globally. As we all know, the days of oil and gas will soon be over. Now it is time to look at new areas of cooperation. The start of NordLink, the direct power line between our countries with 1,400 megawatts, was a great starting point for deepening our new energy cooperation. The supply with Norwegian hydrogen and the storage of CO2 may be next steps for the decarbonization of German industry. These are the topics for discussion in this event. Our meeting today is very relevant in order to face the current challenge and to find common solutions. which are beneficial for both countries. Mr. Prime Minister, your visit today is very important for the German business community. Norway is an important partner for Germany and also for the EU. Both our countries have new governments. I hope you will have a fruitful discussion with our new Chancellor this evening. I'm very pleased that State Secretary Patrick Reichen represents the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action here today. The DIHK really appreciates the support of the Ministry for the German economy and for the German chamber system worldwide. Thank you very much for this. The business communities in Germany and in Norway can really contribute to deepen our cooperation and develop our bilateral energy partnership. I hope that many initiatives and activities will follow today's event. You have the support of the German Chamber organization. You can always count on the German Chamber in Oslo. Your presence here, Mr. Holger Lösch, shows that is also true for the Federal of German Industry, the BDI. So let's start right now. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Peter Adrian, for your introducing words. So before we start the discussion, we need to move some furniture quickly, so enjoy Norway for a minute.
Days without sunlight, and nights without darkness, stretching far beyond the Arctic Circle. Norway is powered by nature, and so are we. With a society that strongly believes in equality, together with free healthcare and education, everyone has the opportunity to pursue their dreams, making us the happiest people in the world. Our coastline, rivers, and fjords form the backbone of our main industries. That's why we are pioneers within marine technology, aquaculture, and energy. And all our electricity comes from clean hydropower. The future of our planet is uncertain, but we choose to be optimistic. We believe that only together we can succeed. Adapting new technology, we must strive to design greener, better, and smarter. By exploring the exceptional, we are pushing for a new standard.
So we are back, marvelous landscape, almost 100% energy from renewables, but still, as we said, Norway is producing and exporting fossil fuels. So I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion. How can this go together, and how can Norway contribute to Germany's decarbonization? So please welcome our panelists, the Norwegian Prime Minister, I already said, so welcome Jonas Gahr Støre. From the German Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action, State Secretary Dr. Patrick Reichen. Also on the panel, the Deputy CEO of the BDI, the Federation of German Industries, Mr. Holger Lösch. And the Chief Operating Officer Hydrogen of RWE Generation SE. Welcome, Dr. Sopna Suri. And we luckily have an expert from the Berlin office of the Norwegian environmental NGO, Bellona Foundation, on the panel here. Welcome, Dr. Erika Bellmann. So I would like to quickly start with a very personal question to all of you, maybe just 1-2 sentences. Why do you personally think it's time now for climate action? Mr. Reichen, would you like to start?
Well, I think that's very simple. I have 4 kids, and I want them to be in a safe environment in 2050.
Dr. Suri.
Indeed, I can just echo. I've got 2 daughters, and definitely there's no time to waste. And I think we should be all doing everything to really push forward towards the climate neutrality.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Well, on the personal account, I have 2 grandchildren. But beyond that, I think this is a great opportunity to make a shift in industry, in the way we work, in the way we consume, in the way we produce. So I think there is a great opportunity in this shift that Norway would like to take active part in.
Thank you. Mr. Lösch.
Yeah, of course, apart from my two daughters, I'm very clear that there is no need in believing that climate change is not going to affect us all. And I am very sure that a +3 and a +4 degree world from an industry perspective would definitely be nothing we would like to produce and to work in.
Dr. Bellman, you're an activist and an expert at the same time. What's your personal motivation?
I have many personal motivations, and I would like to add to your statement. I think the time to take climate action has been around for the last 20 years, actually, because that's how we knew what causes climate change. And so now we are late. So now it's extra, mega, super urgent.
Thank you. Dear Mr. Prime Minister, we talked about this question already. What can Norway, as a fossil fuel exporter, contribute to Germany's decarbonization of the industry?
We have been in a partnership on energy with Germany for 40 years. And I see that we are now moving into a transition in that partnership, which is going to be key to Germany and key to Norway. And I really saw this in the campaign you had in Germany and we had in Norway for elections last fall, that there were similarities. The Chancellor and I, both as opposition politicians, were talking about cutting emissions, creating jobs, doing this through an industrial transition. I think the language was quite similar. And what I see as an opportunity here is that Norway, on the one hand, we are moving on our way out of fossils. We are moving towards renewable. We have 55% cut in 2030 as objective. We have carbon neutrality by 2050 as an objective. We will do this with Europe. So the big challenge now is to produce enough renewables to replace coal, oil, and gas in the longer perspective. And that has to be scaled up quite significantly. And the plans, the ambitions of the German government are really to be noted. Secondly, we are going to produce hydrogen from either green sources or blue sources. And this is where I think Norway's potential as a gas exporter stands out as something very important for Germany. We provide 1/3 of Germany's gas consumption today, but the scenario is that we can continue to deliver gas where we have captured the CO2 and stored it safely under the seabed in the North Sea, so that you can produce hydrogen from gas in the longer perspective. Every country seeking carbon neutrality will have to electrify the economy, then decarbonize industry. And the source which is going to be key here is, among a few others, hydrogen. So what I will propose to my German colleague today is that Norway and Germany takes this partnership one step further, creates a working dialogue on political and technical level on how this can fit together. So in the short term, Germany will, I think, need a stable provider of gas as Norway is in the short term, because you need this in addition to your renewable sources so that when there is no wind and no sun, you have stability. And we know that gas in Europe today is a vulnerable source given what happens further east. But we have to start right now to materialize that hydrogen option. And we will invite Germany also to take part in the carbon capture and storage scenario, which is not the scenario that Germany has discussed with some reluctance in the past. I know this is a controversial theme in many sectors in Germany, but the scenario of doing this as we propose, storing it under the seabed in the North Sea, which we have tested during 30 years, is an industrial opportunity that goes hand in hand with the hydrogen alternatives. So there are many options here. We intend to be leading on hydrogen, on ocean wind, and on the decarbonization of the economy.
But some argue that storing the carbon dioxide underground would only prolong the lifetime of the fossil industries.
Well, I mean, we are in a transition towards the renewables, but we know that renewables also need a backing of a stable source when the transition is there and you need enough of it. So the problem with the fossil fuel is the emission that create the climate change effect. Now, we know from what we see of the reservoirs in the North Sea that we have a lot of storage capacity for this transition phase. So you can take the opportunity of gas without emissions, both for power generation and for industrial purposes through the hydrogen path. What will that look like in 10, 20, 30 and 40 years as the renewables really take their place? I'm optimistic. I believe Europe will reach its neutrality targets around 2050. And there will be more ocean wind, more land wind, more sun-generated electricity. But a part of that equation, I think, can be also blue hydrogen with storage.
You just mentioned that in Germany there was a strong public opposition against CCS. Mr. Greichen, before you came into office, you worked for Agora, a think tank on the Energiewende or the green shift, and you argued in favor of CCS there. What's your perspective now?
Well, I think it is very clear that if you look at carbon neutrality, then it has to be green. It has to be green hydrogen, because with any part of CCS, you always have residual emissions. Now, the question is twofold on CCS. One, are there elements we can't get rid of otherwise? So that's the whole issue of residual emissions in industry, in the cement industry and others, where we have to either compensate it with additional sinks or via CCS. So looking at negative emissions as part of carbon neutrality will be needed. And then the second question is there an interim period between now and 2045 where we don't have enough renewables and we might need transitional other options? Now, I think the question that we're really discussing is the second one here. So is the transition period one where, for example, blue hydrogen can play a role? And there, the German government, I think, has a very clear position. When it comes to where we want to go and where we will put our money, it's green hydrogen, because that's where zero emissions are. With blue hydrogen, you always have residual CO2, you have the methane leakage issues. So this is not zero emission technology. Whenever we invest, whenever we put money on the table, it is going to be the zero emission technology. Now, is there a market for blue hydrogen because CO2 prices are high in the ETS? Maybe. Will private actors then engage in this? Maybe. Will we prohibit that? No, definitely not. So if there is a market that goes into that direction, then it will come. But let me I think make it clear that from the perspective where we want to go, I think what we need to talk about is Norway as an exporter of green hydrogen, with floating offshore wind producing that green hydrogen. And that's where we need to focus also our infrastructure and the planning. And if through that pipeline in between now and 2045, there's also some other hydrogen coming, fine. But it shouldn't be the other way around. It should always have that final vision in mind and already in implementation, because otherwise you do get that discussion of lock-in of fossils that might be of concern for the German public.
So you're in favor of using CCS as a bridging technology until we are fully covered by renewables?
Yes, and the infrastructure planning that we now do has to focus on the final image and not maybe creating lock-ins in something which won't be needed in the long run.
Dr. Suri, you're an expert on hydrogen. What do you think about the color debate and CCS? the color debate of hydrogen. Maybe you explain shortly what's blue, what's turquoise, what's green, what's the difference?
All right, so today, grey hydrogen, to actually start with it, is the, I would say, predominant hydrogen that we have in the industry. And that actually stems from natural gas, but through steam methane reforming, so using hot water steam to actually generate this grey hydrogen. So it definitely has a clear fossil resource or origin. The next step would be, as the Prime Minister already alluded to, blue hydrogen. So saying, yes, you still actually have to deploy the fossil resource, natural gas, but to actually combine it with carbon capture and storage. So you sequestrate the CO2 and actually make sure you actually store it underground so that you can use the hydrogen, which is then called blue. And then the next step, as Mr. Grüne already actually alluded to, is then green hydrogen. The long-term, I would say, also really truly only sustainable hydrogen color here. But also, as mentioned, it really needs enough and sufficient volumes of renewable assets, be it offshore wind, onshore wind, solar PV, to actually making sure we have the required green electricity to produce green hydrogen through electrolysis. So that's the different, I would say, the rough color summary you can give here.
Mr. Lösch. What does the German industry, I mean, you normally after the new government, after Mr. Habeck last week said it's all too slow, we have to speed up. Normally one would expect the German industry would say, not too fast, please. But you did the opposite. You said, yeah, let's go and let's go faster. So what does the industry want and need there?
I mean, basically, the industry wants, first of all, to keep its license to operate, to remain in business globally. The second thing is, of course, we are looking at new patterns of value creation, because industry is always changing. So if we would not have changed, we still would be using steam plants. So we want to go into this future. I think there is a huge degree or a huge confidence in industry that this transition is going to lead to a much brighter and a much more responsible future. But on the other hand, we see the problems of the transition. And I don't think it makes reason or sense to deny that there is a lot of risk on this way, especially if we look at a world where the global ambitions for climate protection, to say the least, are a little bit diverging. So we need to get through of this. And therefore, first of all, we want to have at hand the necessary things, the energy, the green energy and all of this, to keep on working as a German industry in this country, in Europe. And on the other hand, we want to see long-term paths where we can create new value creation patterns. And hydrogen is especially good to describe this. So we need a lot of hydrogen, green hydrogen, not emitting hydrogen, to become CO2 neutral as an industry in Germany now. And in the future, of course, in green hydrogen, there lie a lot of chances for German companies, technology companies, in creating a global hydrogen market. So you see these two patterns which are important for us, but of course, we have to look, and this is what Patrick Grüne, of course, sees the same way. We have to look at what is happening over the next years and what is the long-term vision, and there might different approaches in the short and medium-term transition than the long-term target.
What about CCS and Norway's proposal?
I mean, CCS has for a long time been an absolute no-brainer in the climate community. Because everybody knows that just reducing CO2 globally is not going to lead us to a 1.5 degree target. So we need negative emissions. And negative emissions...
Negative is just...
negative emissions is natural things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean...
taking
trees,
carbon dioxide
everything,
out of
or you do technical things. And technical thing could be storing hydrogen or burning plants, storing the CO2, and not emitting the CO2, so you have a negative emission effect. And since everybody knows this, it was a bit unfortunate that the German discussion was so heated on CCS, and the regulations we have in place here in Germany are absolutely prohibiting for the creation of CCS here in Germany. But we need to open this door, because long term we need negative emissions, and CCUS, the usage of carbon, we should take into consideration as well, will be absolute key in reaching these long-term targets.
Dr. Bellmann, what are the risks of CCS, although your foundation is supporting CCS in Norway, but what about the risks, the possible leaks and other things?
Our foundation has thought about it long and hard and participated in a lot of studies in Norway. But just as the Prime Minister said, there has been now explorations going on for 30 years. And there's a lot of reliable data, and certain safe geological formations have been identified, which would be suitable for, let's say, high quality CO2 storage. So after informing ourselves about those efforts to keep the storage sites safe, we have become supporters of CCS in those specific geological formations under the North Sea, because we really feel that this would be putting the carbon back to where it came from originally, like not in the atmosphere, but back in the geosphere under the Earth. So we would basically zero out the damage to the atmosphere and the climate.
How was the public discussion about that in Norway? Because it seems so different in Germany.
I think in Norway there has been no major concern, actually. I think that I'm actually not very much in favor of pulling out the old German stories, because it was like a totally different situation. The first German CCS debate was about CCS on coal power plants, and then it's no wonder that all the civil society just got like because coal power plants are not necessary for the energy transition, and it's clearly no need to prolong the lifetime with CCS. Now we have the coal exit. It's going to happen even faster than the previous law required it to have. So this is done. So the thing is really, what do we have to do for industry, for the process emissions, which cannot be avoided in any other way? What do we do for negative emissions that we all know are necessary, and they are necessary beyond 2050, because then we have to not only be zero emission, but we have to actually take out carbon of the atmosphere. So there's no reason to not develop CCS for those particular applications. And it's very urgent that we take this action. Because it's still a technology development path, and it's still an infrastructure build-up path. And if we want to be zero and, in fact, negative in 2050, we should start now. And that would also be my request to the new Economy and Climate Ministry, that the legal framework for carbon capture, storage, usage and transport, that it will be done urgently, hopefully still, you know, the next 4 years.
Will it, Mr. Grüne?
Well, I mean, you probably have noticed that last week we published our State of the Art of the Energy Transition paper, and there we put a lot of priorities for the first year. And those priorities are now key, and that is building up renewables and lots of renewables and getting the thing done. 80% renewables by 2030 is now the key priority of this government and of this ministry. And we need to put away a lot of different obstacles that we have currently in our way, because that is what also industry needs. We're seeing current power prices all over Europe, and they are there because we have high gas prices and not enough in the renewables. So that's the key priority, and we will focus that on that totally. Now, yes, we have a coalition a period of 4 years. And in those 4 years, we will also look at the other issues. We have in the coalition treaty this a sentence saying that we need a long-term strategy on negative emissions, and we will do that. But please understand that for 2022, we have a different focus.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Well, I can follow the State Secretary's sequence as you describe, and I think also in Norway, when we look at our needs for increased electricity power consumption, it will come from renewables. I mean, Norway is powered by renewables in our internal economy. So we see there's a potential within battery production. A lot of European car production is now looking to the new battery factories being produced in Norway. So we have a potential there. But coming back to CCS, I, having studied the German debate on this, understand why this is followed with skepticism, because it has a lot of implications of where people live, storage under local communities, and all around that. Now, the concept in the North Sea is very different. And it started in 1990 when we started to tax CO2 on the platforms. So there was an incentive to say, are there part of the CO2 coming up that we can take initially and push down? And there was also an incentive not to do flaring on the platforms, which is burning gas, also with an incentive. Now, both were tried and both worked. So for 30 years, we have tried exactly as Bellona said, to say, does it hold, does it leak? So we do it here in the North Sea and up in the Barents Sea. Both places, it is a solid technology. But we can't do that without there being a value chain. So we have 500 major waste plants in Europe. Big, in every city there's a waste treatment of household waste, industrial waste. A lot of CO2 emission. Now one of those plants is testing out in Norway. Can we capture CO2 from the waste plant, transport it down to the harbor, put it on board a ship, and ship it around to the storage?
What about the shipping emissions?
The shipping emissions? Well,
on the way, we have to calculate that.
When the CO2 is on board the ship, there will be no emissions, and the shipping fleet in Norway is gradually now rapidly moving to hydrogen. So we're going to produce hydrogen primarily for mobility reasons. Now, my point is that in the early parts of this century, when we were in government last time, we tried out and tested and succeeded in capture. Now we need to be able to do the storage in a large scale. So a part of what we call the Northern Light project, which we now cooperate with German partners, Swedish, Nordic partners, we are looking at the potential from industry to hand in their CO2, so to say, and then it can be safely deposited. And I believe that for...
Like Heidelberg's cement.
Heidelberg is doing the cement south of Oslo, which is one of the test cases being tested and supported by government, which I believe it will only be the start. But let me point out one thing in the short run now. We have a very heated debate in Norway about our own electricity prices because of what is happening in Europe. And what is happening in Europe? Europe is having a tax hike, a price hike because of gas. There is a huge gas shortage. So I think in the very short term, what will be important for Germany, and as I hear from most people I talk to here, can Norway continue to be a stable provider of gas? And I think, our answer is yes, we can be that, but we are also in the transition. And I think one important element in Norway continuing to be a provider of gas is that we link it to CCS. So that tomorrow's gas-fired power plant in Germany, which is powered by Norwegian gas, will be fueled by gas that has taken the CO2 out. And I think, that is, any energy mix in Europe will be a mix of different things in the coming decades. One day, eventually, it will all be renewables, I think, with wind and sun and these sources. But for Norway, it's very clear that our scenario for gas is not a business as usual, another fossil fuel with emissions. It is an industrial transition to deliver gas with storage, capture and storage, which is an entirely new kind of resource for your stability, for your industrial production, and for your hydrogen production.
But still, you, as the new Prime Minister, didn't set an end date, an exit date of fossil fuels. I think you're going on with looking for new gas fields and keeping on, Norway is living on that for years.
But you know, our predictions are very clear. This is demand-driven, and we see, I mean, all of our gas is basically going to Europe. And we see that our clients in Europe are now moving drastically into the renewable phase. We support that. We too are renewable, and we support that transition. But this is, as the Chancellor is saying, it's an industrial transition. You have to adapt your industry to this. And on that path, the gas with CCS, not without CCS, but with CCS, is a safe source towards the carbon neutrality. So we are on that path, and we believe it will be an important element in Germany's transition.
You just talked about the high energy prices, which are a big topic in Germany as well. Mr. Greichen, and maybe all of you, what do you think, what can we do that this green shift is not becoming unpayable for people?
I think, let's be crystal clear, the high prices that we're currently seeing have nothing to do with the energy transition. They're because...
But that's the fear of people.
No, but they're because fossil gas is very expensive because of shortage of supply from Russia. Now, what is the answer? Short term, we will of course discuss with our partners whether there are other supplies. Midterm, it is even faster energy transition because I mean, the production cost of wind and solar is 5 cents per kilowatt hours. If we had that currently as the price on the wholesale market, everyone would be happy. So I think it's very clear that the current prices we see reinforce the case for a speedy energy transition, and of course then also a joint project with Norway on embarking on that path.
So to accelerate the speed of renewables and then hydrogen, because this is the key technique, Dr. Sori, what do you expect, what do you need from the government, because you are working in the field of new hydrogen projects in Germany? Where's the challenge? Why are things so slowly?
So let me just start with quickly explaining why there is even a challenge. It's actually this so-called chicken and egg challenge here. So what we are really trying to bring forward with hydrogen projects is to really bring together the production of the hydrogen together with the transport, because that's actually where you need to get the green hydrogen then to the actual off-taker, the customer, but also having the customer being part of a project. And I think tying this all together, that's what we call integrated projects with an integrated value chain approach. So this is nice. I think, and I really emphasize it is nice to actually get the first, also larger scale projects, and some of those which we as RW are engaging in, for instance, is Get H2 in Lingen, which is looking at having such an integrated approach delivered already by 2024 with the first 100 megawatts. But of course, the perspective has to be, in order to really help decarbonize the German industry, to move into gigawatts. But it takes time, and I think there's definitely a lot of optimism, and I'm saying there's a lot of realism and pragmatism out there to making this happen by, I would say, the end of the 20s. Nevertheless, you also asked what could we then maybe see government to further actually help everybody in industry bring this to reality. I think there are 5 factors. The one is the right political and regulatory framework. And I mean, we've talked about it. Renewables assets, we are all looking to actually building them out very quickly. But as a matter of fact, as of today, we don't have sufficient renewables electricity in the German market. So we need a regulatory framework that really promotes the production of green hydrogen, but is not, I would say, too restrictive. So which should also allow existing renewables plants to actually fuel the electrolysis plants, because the quicker we move into production, the quicker we can actually serve the industry. The second topic is about funding. And yes, you talked about costs for the consumers. I mean, again, as a matter of fact, we do have today a huge, let me call it, cost difference from an industrial off-taker's perspective. If they're used to take grey hydrogen, coming back to the colors, or maybe natural gas, or other fossil alternatives, they do compare how much would they have to actually pay for the green hydrogen molecule. And here funding mechanisms, which are already nicely in place, like important projects of common European interest, are helpful. However, we are lacking speed. It's a pretty long and detailed bureaucratic process. And it really makes me worrying about the speed it really enables or actually disables us to deliver. So it's regulation, it's funding, it's speed of renewables built out. So definitely, I think the increase of renewables targets in Germany is a very, very important step, and I definitely very much welcome the 80% ambition we are having here. But in order to deliver, we need as a fourth element the topic about permitting and authorization. Yeah, I mean, it's great to have a target, but I think we all need, from society, from politicians, from communities, to working together to making sure we bring them forward so that we are allowed to actually have new renewables plants coming online. And I would say last but not least, we've heard it a couple of times, it's about infrastructure. And this is, I think, to my bridge back to the topic of CCS and blue hydrogen.
And the pipelines, you're speaking about.
Pipelines, yeah, because it's great to produce the hydrogen, but it needs to get to the off-taker. And if I think about the industrial areas and centers in Germany, they're not necessarily always there where the hydrogen will come into play. So the quicker we can incentivize today's network operators to switch from natural gas transport to hydrogen, and why would we incentivize them? Why would they do it? They would do it because they see the volumes. And if the green hydrogen is not there yet today, but maybe the blue hydrogen as bridging technology can help fill those pipelines, it all brings the story together. Production, transport, and offtake. And those 5 elements would be something I think we would all benefit from, not only from a German, but also from a Norwegian perspective.
So, Prime Minister.
Well, I think it's if we look at this industrial transition, what has fascinated me, I've always said in the Norwegian debate, people say we live in the oil age. And I said that is really not true for Norway. We live in an energy age, which starts with the hydropower in the late 19th century. Engineers developed the potential of the waterfalls. Then we had 70 years with that, and then we found oil. And then we saw the opportunity of gas. Now, last week, it was signed in New York by Equinor, which was Statoil, the oil and gas company, a contract outside New York providing electricity to 2 million New Yorkers from ocean wind. And who are building these ocean windmills? It is the engineers and the workers and the industrialists of Equinor. So I think that is in a way proving that now this energy age is moving into the renewable phase. And it happens on the shoulders of that industry which we are in a way moving out of. So who has the experience of building these huge platforms with mills? Well, the platform technology comes from part of what you did when you build oil platforms. And the wind potential has to be collaborated with German industry and other industries. I say this because if we look 10 years ahead in time, what will we see in the North Sea? There will be gas cables. There will be a traffic, I believe, of CO2 coming from continental Europe out to the deposit place to be stored under the seabed. And there will also be a network of ocean windmill, which can provide new electricity potential for the electrification of the economy. So this is where we're moving into, with huge industrial opportunities. And I mean, 2-3 billion people on the globe live by the coast. And it's the coast, again, that can provide this new energy source massively from wind. So that's where I see really this moving. I'm really curious to see how Germany will, and I know we will, because when you set the course, Germany has all the dedication and the talent, but you, as we, have a challenge in providing more land wind. It is a controversial theme. And I think you have decided that 2% of your territory will be for land wind. I believe we should be able to produce more land wind. Norway has a lot of territory. We also are familiar with the complexity of land wind. So finding that potential for creating the renewable sources is a challenge. We have to face it. On that way, again, I believe, again, the decarbonization of gas through CCS is an important resource we should not let go.
Dr. Bellman, you tried to say something when Dr. Suri was speaking.
Yes, and it actually also fits very well to what the Prime Minister just said. because I wanted to kind of expand our kind of vision and goal perspective a little bit. Staatssekretär Greichen said that the end goal is like green hydrogen. Below our vision is that the end goal is renewable electricity. Because even if you look at green hydrogen and say it's produced with 100% renewable electricity and it's clean, it's green, it's incredibly inefficient because you would have to use a lot of renewable electricity to produce the hydrogen. You would have to transport it somewhere else. And then in a gas power plant, what can you maximally hope for? Like recover maybe a third of that electricity that you originally put in there? Probably less. So this is not something that could be the end goal because we would actually be wasting renewable electricity. So what a picture was, drawn by the Prime Minister is much nicer one even, that you actually have electricity production at there are big enough cables going north-south direction to transport that electricity from the North Sea to everywhere it's needed in Germany. When you, in terms of what is the infrastructure that should be the target in terms of goals and visions, it's actually a lot of grid, and a grid in a north-south direction. Until we get to this point, there will be still fossil energy carriers that play a role, and because we cannot wait for the abundance of renewable electricity, I think we should move as quickly as possible into decarbonizing those fossil energy carriers through CCS, especially also keeping in mind that part of the end goal is producing negative emissions, so there will be some kind of bio-CCS even past 2050. So with our technology and infrastructure for CO2 transport we develop, it's not going to be like gone to waste because then we don't need it anymore. We will still need it for negative emissions.
Thank you, Dr. Baumann. One short statement, and then I would like to ask to open the discussion also to the journalists.
From an industry perspective, the key challenge is getting the investments done. In our study, we came up with a number that to get to the 2030 targets of Germany, it takes about 860 billion euros of additional investment in climate protection measures over the next years. So that's a lot. So we need a lot of speed, and we need the possibility, the regulation framework to get these investments done. And we have to take into consideration that a lot of these investors don't see a business case right now for their investment. So we need support. So we need a framework which is going to enable them to invest and still stay competitive. And all of this brings me to the conclusion that it's probably not only one priority we have to follow. This is such a huge transition. We have to follow 100 priorities at the same time, and priorities are going to change over the years. So we're going to have other priorities in the long-term vision and others which we need now. And the hydrogen case is a perfect one again. So we need a lot of hydrogen to decarbonize industry processes. We will not have enough green hydrogen available from domestic production. We need to put up a global market to help us. First steps are being done. But in that, we probably will need a transitional use of blue hydrogen. Personally, I see the future in industrial-wise in green hydrogen, but I know if we don't get enough hydrogen, this change is not going to happen in Germany, and that's the problem. We don't have spare investors. If ThyssenKrupp's not investing, nobody else is going to invest there. Either it's going on or it's stopping. So that's the problem, and but I'm very confident that we will see a very, very diverse technology world in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Lösch. Because we only have like 8 more minutes in the live stream now, I would like to open the discussion to the journalists. If you have a little thing in front of yourself, just push the button and introduce yourself shortly, please. Who would like to start? Are there any questions?
Yes, hello. My name is Marlies Uken for Die Zeit, Sites Online. I have a question for the Prime Minister. You talked about the value chain and the business case for your CCS project. How could it look like? And could you think about a condition like, okay, we are selling our gas to Europe, but only if we also take back the CO2?
Well, you know, what really delivered the first capture of CO2 in the North Sea, as I said, was a CO2 tax on the platform. And we were ridiculized by some saying, are you taxing your own energy industry? What is the purpose? But the purpose was to create that incentive for doing this. Now, with the CO2 prices at the level where they are at, the incentive is gradually being provided. So what we have been working on in Norway is to create, it is called the Longship Project, which is a name depicting the old Viking ships. But Northern Light is the specific delivery project of that project, which consists of basically mapping the CO2 potential coming from industry that can be shipped to the west coast of Norway and taken out to this site. And so far, this is moving in the right direction, you know, in terms of mapping sufficient resources for making this a possible scenario that we could realize. It is supported by Norwegian state funding as an initial technology. That is needed. We spent a lot of money 10, 15 years ago really to try out the capture part in multiple testing with the help of a lot of international technological experts. So we now have the potential of extracting, as we said, from the Heidelberg cement factory south of Oslo. We know how it can be done on waste management and in a number of other areas. And you know, if we were to realize the potential of taking CO2 out of the waste management around Oslo, there are 499 more such sites in Europe that could have an incentive because of the CO2 price to do the same. So this is the value chain. And I believe that is a very important ecological value chain because it will take CO2 out of going up in the atmosphere and put it down in the safe storage. And it will also then allow, I mean, we are in the transition out of fossil fuels, meaning the fossil fuels leading to emissions. We are going to massively increase the renewable production. Hydrogen is a very fascinating scenario. Had I come 5 years ago, we would not have had this discussion around hydrogen. It's much closer. We announced just before Christmas from our technological support unit to environmental changes, support from government to 3 major sites, which is now investing in hydrogen in industrial production in the north and in the south of Norway, really replacing gas with hydrogen and taking emissions down. So this is now coming step by step. But the value chain of CCS is really there in this project. And you know, I see it as my job is to inform the reality about this and the opportunity this has for European industry in these important years to come.
Are there any further questions?
Thank you. My name is Daniel Wetzel with Die Welt. Mr. Prime Minister, the gas crisis is likely to stay with us till next winter. To what extent can Norway increase its production and deliveries and step in for the lack of Russian supplies on the short term?
Well, you know, as you know, it's not the Norwegian government that is providing gas. It is the companies running the licenses in the North Sea. And my information tells me that they deliver to the maximum of their capacity. And a bit more. They have really optimized the delivery potential. So I think the answer is, you know, that they will be at a stable level. It is not to say that, you know, they can simply replace gas from Russia that would not show up. But of course, this is also highlighting what will happen in the coming years. You know, what will be in terms of activity, finding new sources. But in my government's calculation, when we look into further gas exploration, it has to be seen in the context of CCS, because we are going to get emissions down. we have a 50% reduction target for the continental shelf by 2030, which will mean electrification of a lot of the platforms in the North Sea. And we see an opportunity for gas in this hydrogen scenario, but it is closely linked to the CCS option. So if we get collaboration on that, you know, we can see the blue hydrogen, be it a transitional source or be it a part of the mix, that could play an important role in delivering 2050 carbon neutrality.
There was another question. You wanted to add something?
I have to jump in here because, of course, from the perspective of Bellona as an environmental organization, there should not be any new exploration, especially not moving farther north into the vulnerable Arctic. So the key here would be not to find new transitional sources, but actually really put all the speed on renewables deployment. So no new exploration is needed. And as the CCS, we see, you know, for the existing supply and for especially for the otherwise unavoidable process emissions from the German industry here in this context. If at all possible, please no new exploration, and certainly not farther north than they are.
But you say you will do it. You will explore.
No, I mean, we're going through a phase here, but you know, we never believed that Norway switching off from one day to the other would be a handshake with the environmental transition.
But isn't that like double standards?
No, it's not a double standard because we are linking it to a demand side that will be in a critical situation if we were to say that, you know, this is Norway's contribution, we switch it off. We believe that, this is Norway's contribution, we switch it off. We believe that primarily gas with CCS will play an important transitional role as we dramatically scale up the renewable production, both in Norway and in European countries. But the transition target is very clear. That's where we're heading.
There was one further question.
Yeah, my name is Jutta Faulkner from the business portal Norway. Norway had hoped for support from the EU for its CCS project Longskip. And it is now clear Fortium, your waste processing plant, will not get any assistance from the EU for this special project. What does this cancellation mean for the whole project and for the further cooperation with the EU?
Well, as you know, there were two major projects that we applied, the companies applied for support from the European side, in addition to state funding. And there was support granted for the Heidelberg project on cement, not thus far on the waste management plant. So that is being studied now by the government, how we can, you know, seek additional finance to materialize this project, which is run by municipality of Oslo and also Fortum, the Finnish company, to see if we can find an option there. So that was not solved instantly by the European grant, but there are other paths to follow, and we follow that very closely.
That is the separation of the carbon dioxide out of the emissions of these
waste plants. Yeah.
Are there any further questions? Yes, please.
Sofie Prestegård, TV 2. In Norway, there has been a debate regarding the high electricity prices and if we should limit our export of electricity to Europe and possibly renegotiating some existing deals like Nord link to Germany. From the German perspective, is there any room for renegotiation?
I think we're all suffering currently from the same situation. And of course, there is then the impulse to, would we be better off if we cut some sort of cross-border trades? At some point, we had lower power prices than Poland and vice versa. And I think at the end, that doesn't go to the root where it needed. That's why I think we jointly need to have a very close look at the gas market. The question is, how do we solve that crisis? And let's rather not start inner European debate on whether or not our trades and solidarity mechanisms should be opened up again.
Any further questions?
Yeah, I had another question. Norway aims to be the first country in the world to be fully electrified by 2050. And I think everything should be electrified: cars, rigs, building sites, ferries. And I think technologically everything is possible, but there are also a lot of problems, and there is a lot of resistance also in Norway. And so my question is, and the weather, of course, is also crazy too at the moment in Norway. In which areas do you expect the biggest problems for the green shift? And what is the biggest challenge for you personally in this process?
Well, one personal challenge will be to be in office until 2050. But I'll do my best. It's a big challenge. I think, you know, what we have in our party manifesto is that basically saying everything that can be electrified should be electrified. So that gives an inspiration. And I saw flying down to Germany yesterday, reading out of the Norwegian news, that 9 out of 10 cars sold in Norway last year were electric cars. Now, we've been on that path for some years, but 9 out of 10 is really, you know, it is a major thing. Our objective on cars is that we, by 2025, only will sell non-fossil cars. But we may be there even before. And the interesting thing about this is that when we move ahead like we have done on cars, it has an acceleration effect on the rest of the economy. And you know that with Norway's hydro water resources, we are pretty close. I mean, we don't spend any of our gas for domestic consumption. I think the major area now that we have to go into is the shipping fleet, especially the near coast fleet, the shipping that is transporting alongside Norwegian coast. We have an intensive dialogue with Norwegian shipping industry, which is a leading industry, that the investment they will be making in the coming years, which is normally a 40-year investment for new major ships, is really directing their attention to hydrogen and to ammoniac. So this is something we also, you know, can prepare for and push. And if they succeed to be early succeeders on that, they have a world product. So that is, you know, a major thing. We do electricity for cars. We will do hydrogen for heavy transport and for shipping. That is about to happen now. I think that is a big challenge and an opportunity for us to grasp. Then, you know, another, it's almost like a fun fact, but you saw beautiful pictures of Norway initially. We are a long-stretched country. So we are dependent on the air industry, and they fly in northern Norway on short runways from place to place. The ambition of having electrification of the aviation fleet for these short terms is a very attractive ambition, very interesting ambition. And if it succeeds, it could really be very important for other purposes for Norway and for my government, namely to maintain population patterns in Norway that people live along Norway. Depends on transport. And today, transport is a major obstacle to coming around in Norway. Electrification of that fleet of aviation could open a huge new opportunity. So new areas in the transport sector will be absolutely key to reach that target that you are setting. And I think that will happen before 2050 because the acceleration is there.
Thank you so much. Before we end this discussion in like 2 minutes, I have one more question because you have a tight agenda here. You're going to meet the Chancellor Scholz. You're going to meet Mr. Steinmeier, our president, today. And in the morning, you had a talk around the Münchner Sicherheitskonferenz. What role does the actual situation with Russia and also the energy crisis play there?
No, I think we share, Norway and Germany, a big concern and a very serious one about what the situation is in and around Ukraine. You know, the scenario of having military confrontation, which cannot be branded any other way than a war in Europe in 2022, really doesn't belong. We have a political toolbox to address unsolved issues between nations in Europe, which should be fully used. And as we speak, Berlin, people are coming in and out here. We are talking and the discussions between the US and Russia, NATO and Russia. So we have to pay major emphasis on this. But I'm wary about it and the development and the escalation and how little it will take really to ignite something which will be very bad for all parties. Norway is a neighbor with Russia. We have been at peace with them for 1,000 years. We are following these developments in the north, where it is rather now quiet and stable. But I'm very concerned about the situation which is in Europe, and it's a concern I think that my German colleagues share.
And Finland and Sweden are now discussing joining the NATO. You discussed that?
Well, Finland and Sweden, I think, have for many years been perfectly in their right of saying this is a scenario we are totally free to consider. None of them have actively argued that they have an application ready to do so. They have been alliance-free countries, EU members. But Norway would say that for us and for our security, it is imperative that Sweden and Finland are free to make their choice. At the moment, they are both close partners with NATO, and bilaterally, we have much closer security and defense cooperation between Norway, Sweden, and Finland because we share geography in the north. But for Norway, it is intolerable. It's intolerable to have a third country say that this is what Finland and Sweden could do or cannot do. We joined NATO in 1949, which was a shift away from neutrality to belonging to an alliance, and it should be any country's free choice to make that decision. And that includes, for me, as Norwegian Prime Minister, first and foremost, our Nordic neighbors.
And if you're meeting Mr. Scholz and Mr. Steinmeier today, the energy, the gas crisis, how will you speak about that? What's your focus there?
No, I think it's a follow-up of what we discussed today. And my point is that we've said for 40 years that we are partners in energy for obvious reasons. You see the gas, you see the electricity. What I would propose to my colleagues is let's now organize a structured dialogue between Norway and Germany to see how we can take this forward. Between our experts, between our industries, between our ministries, because I believe there is really complementarity here. And it should be, of course, to the mutual benefit. Otherwise, cooperation doesn't work. But I think the conversation we've had today proves that there are a lot of very interesting scenarios, which fits with the Chancellor's reading and my reading, that this is very much about industrial transition. And it is in industry that we have skills, technology, and working people who know how to make shifts. We, as politicians, we can vote targets, but the ones who can deliver on it, they work in industry, and they know they have done it before, and they are the ones who can do it again.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Just for you, the opportunity to say one last sentence, please, each of you, what you take out of this discussion for, what do you take for your work? Mr. Greichen.
I take from this discussion that the cooperation between Germany and Norway definitely needs a next deepening step. And I note that our Norwegian partners are very eager to take that step, and we will have an answer for that from the German side very soon.
Thank you. Dr. Suri?
I'm definitely taking away that Norway is very well positioned in terms of providing fairly low-cost blue hydrogen options to Germany. And I think, given this being a transitory part of the solution spice, then later not only having import option on blue, but also green, I think companies like ours would be very happy to actually contribute, because I think it needs strong partnerships to actually then serve the German industry, because they can't wait. And I take it as a European, we either win together or we lose together. Yeah, I mean, climate neutrality is nothing any market or country can do on their own, and hence it would be great to have this collaboration being intensified.
Sture.
Well, I see the Fit for 55, and I see the German government's new platform. And when I read it, I see both of them are filled with large ambitions, huge opportunities, but also complex, and I see Norway's fit in those. So it's my job as a Prime Minister to see how can we do that to mutual benefit. And I believe that is an interesting job.
Mr. Lösch.
Yeah, what I take away is that we really see that fossil-powered countries are extremely on the move, and my conviction is that we really have to tap into the knowledge and the willingness of these countries to empower our all transformation. And the one thing which is absolutely clear is that cooperation, cooperation, cooperation. This is not a problem anybody can solve on its own.
Dr. Bellman.
Well, for me, I guess hope that things will move much quicker now into the implementation phase, since it seems to be an overall alignment on goals, long-term goals, medium-term goals. So now it's actually going one step farther and creating all the necessary legal framework and doing all the contracting and all these things so to get into the implementation phase quickly, and this would be awesome.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for this very vivid and, as I think, interesting discussion. I'm very keen to know, to look into the next 20, 30 years, what's going to happen and how fast we are speeding up. Thanks for your attention on this live stream, and thank you for coming here and joining the discussion. Thank you.